Over 73,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed by Israel since October 2023. Over 1,000 of those deaths have occurred since the so-called ceasefire. If you count bodies retrieved from the rubble, that number surpasses 5,000. And it makes no mention of indirect deaths. Life expectancy in Gaza fell by 47% in 2024, not unexpected today, given much of the population live in makeshift camps with 60 million tons of rubble to clear and a third of hospitals non-functional. The recovery cost for Gaza has been put at $71.4 billion by the UN, EU and World Bank. So how's it going? Trump's Board of Peace received pledges of $17 billion, but none of it has landed in the World Bank administered fund. Donations flow instead through a JP Morgan account, including some millions from Morocco and the UAE to pay for the board's executive salaries. But most of it has not materialized. Hamas dissolved its Gaza government on 6th of July and offered to hand civil administration to the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. This was established in January under Trump's Board of Peace, but it did not offer to disarm. By it, I mean Hamas. On the 20th of July, it elected its new leader, Khalil al-Hayya, the last of the founding generation. Now, in theory, this phase of the ceasefire should mean Hamas decommissioning, Israeli troops withdrawing, an International Stabilisation Force moving in. But Israeli troops have only expanded their occupation, the ISF is yet to enter, and the Board of Peace appears to have abandoned reconstruction. While Palestinians have no promise of self-governance, Israel approaches an election in October, and Israeli officials briefed Channel 12 that they expect the Board of Peace to rule Hamas in breach within 2 to 3 months, clearing the path back to war. Joining me to discuss this is Palestinian political analyst Mohammed Shahada. Mohammed, welcome and thank you for being with us today. So a stabilisation force that's yet to enter, a new administration that's yet to enter, and extravagant plans for Gaza Riviera that have little to no money in the bank. What has Trump's Board of Peace actually achieved in Gaza?
Well, the Board of Peace was from the very get-go a scam. I remember being briefed on a conversation with some Arab leaders of the mediating countries back when the deal was signed, and all of them were unanimously saying that this is not a plan, it's not a framework, it's basically a spectacle, a stunt, and all of it fell down back then to Trump wanting to win the Nobel Peace Prize. That's why the deal was announced only 2 days before the prize was announced in Norway. Ever since Netanyahu held the approach of drowning Trump in the details, trying to bore him out of this, trying to flood him with endless talking points. And it worked handsomely. And the reason why it worked, why the Board of Peace is going nowhere, is because all of the people that are supposed to implement that Trump agreement in Gaza are fanatical pro-Israeli right-wingers. So take, for example, Ari Lightstone. That is the Board of Peace advisor that is in charge of implementing the ceasefire in the ground. He is the liaison between the CMCC, the center that Trump created to oversee his ceasefire arrangement, and the White House. And Ari Lightstone, the way he's been described to me by numerous European and Israeli experts, diplomats, etc., is that he's more right-wing than Netanyahu. If you look at Kushner and Witkoff, we saw precisely what they did in Iran and how they handled that file catastrophically, to the extent that Tehran demanded J.D. Vance to take over and Kushner Witkoff to be excluded. Those were the guys that were supposed to design the whole Trump deal. And they're as close as one can be to Netanyahu and the Israeli right. So it's no surprise that the final result is basically a mirage. Nothing materialized whatsoever.
Now, if we look inside Gaza, Hamas dissolved its Gaza government on the 6th of July, and it offered to hand civil administration to the NCAG. That's the administrative body established under Trump's Board of Peace. But they have not disbanded. In fact, Hamas just appointed a new leader. Tell us a bit about Khalil al-Hayya and what his appointment signals about Hamas's positioning in the situation.
So in terms of Hamas disbanding, they did disband the government, or what was called the follow-up administrative committee that was the de facto authority in charge of Gaza. And they called on Israel to immediately allow NCAG, the National Technocratic Committee that Trump created, to take over Gaza, and has been stuck in Egypt ever since. The only problem right now is Israel is physically blocking that NCAG, the committee, from going into Gaza and taking over from Hamas. You see this Netanyahu mentality of trying to keep Hamas in power in Gaza in order to maintain that pretext that legitimizes the ongoing genocide and use Hamas as a scarecrow. I talked to people from NCAG. All of them are ready to go into Gaza immediately. I spoke to mediators, to other people, other parties that are involved. Everyone is in on allowing NCAG to go into Gaza and take over. Israel is still blocking it. The other issue about Khalil al-Hayya, he was just elected to take over the political bureau of Hamas as a successor of both Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh before him. Hayya is seen inside Hamas as more of a center-right figure, religious conservative, but at the same time pragmatist. He sits somewhere in between someone as Khalid Mish'al on the moderate side or someone as Sinwar on the militant side of Hamas's leadership. And with Hayya, what he offers is twofold. Number one, a continuity of Ismail Haniyeh's way of handling things, that he would maintain Hamas's closeness, the tactical closeness to Iran. He would hope that Tehran would manage to include Gaza in the American-Iranian talks that are ongoing. He would hope that Hamas would manage to increase sort of the cooperation with Tehran in order to increase Tehran's ability to shield Gaza the same way that they're doing in Lebanon, or trying to create pressure on Israel to mitigate the Israeli ongoing genocide in Gaza. The second aspect is basically Hayya is seen inside Hamas. His legacy is the father of 4 martyrs, and that gives him the leeway. It gives him the necessary legitimacy and credence to agree to tough compromises that maybe Mish'al would have not been able to do without his legitimacy coming into question, especially that Hayya is from Gaza himself. And there is the last dimension is basically inside Hamas, Hayya is seen as a technocrat or an administrator. He's not seen as some sort of fiery leader that would make fiery speeches constantly and try to be a rebel rouser. So it is particularly this moment that you need someone like this that can unify the different wings of Hamas. The only thing that is up to test at the moment is how Israel would react to it. We have a long history of Israel foiling and spoiling what is called Palestinian peace offensives. When you have Palestinian forces, factions, parties, or mediators, international parties that are trying to push Hamas or other actors into a moderate lane, Israel perceives it as an existential threat. They call it a peace offensive, that Palestinians become too moderate, they get too much international respectability, that Israel runs out of PR talking points. And Israel has historically sought to sabotage this by using the maximum force possible in order to tip the balance of power to the favor of the hardliners. So we've seen it recently with Israel assassinating the entire top leadership of Hamas's militant wing in Gaza, although they were told repeatedly by the mediators that someone as Izz-Din Haddad, the top commander of the Qassam brigades that Israel assassinated, would have been crucial to enforce the decommissioning and disarmament if Hamas had agreed to this. Instead, what you have is this leadership vacuum in the militant wing, and the second line leadership that is taking over is more hardline and more ideological. And it is deliberate from the Israeli side to engineer such an outcome.
So you point to this situation in the first part of Israel potentially sabotaging this new administrative body of Gaza to play into that idea of Palestine being ungovernable by Palestinians. And then in the second part of assassinating Hamas leadership in a way that has encouraged hardline forces and goes against the progress towards peace. Of course, Israel will use Hamas's declination of saying it will disarm as a precedent to stay in Gaza. And we are seeing that. In fact, the Board of Peace's own terms allow or say that Hamas disarmament is a condition to Israeli troop withdrawal. I'm aware that you, Mohammed, have spoken to some sources from Hamas. What have you learned about the willingness to disarm and the willingness to cooperate with that aspect of the peace process in order to encourage Israeli troops to withdraw? Of course, relevant context here is that it is not just Hamas refusing to disarm. Israel is continuing to strike Gaza as we speak. I suppose that's protracting this situation. Just talk to us about the status of the troop withdrawal and whether Hamas disarmament, I suppose, is a feasible precondition to Israel pulling out.
Well, you have the public record. You had numerous Hamas leaders that said on the record that they are willing to lay down their arms as an outcome of a peace process or a peace agreement that would give Palestinians their own statehood, self-determination, etc., on the 1967 borders. So that's less than 22% of historic Palestine's area. You have also the private discussions that have been happening behind closed doors with mediators with Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, in which Hamas leaders showed openness towards the idea of decommissioning, modeled after Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement. The difference between decommissioning and disarmament is that disarmament means surrender. The way that Israel is asking for it, they say, give up every single weapon that is left in Gaza, totally. Tunnels, rockets, sniper rifles, pepper sprays, batons, even a pocket knife. And after you give up everything, disband and dismantle the armed brigades, then Israel would begin withdrawing many months after you have an international mission that would go in and verify. The problem here is basically the weapons are the only leverage, the only guarantee that a ceasefire agreement would be fulfilled to the letter by Israel, which has violated the first phase of the ceasefire thousands of times, killed over 1,000 people in Gaza. So basically, the Israeli approach is unworkable. It's deliberately so. It's supposed to antagonize and get Hamas to say no, to use it against them. The decommissioning paradigm is basically you have a process where you would freeze the weapons, store them, lock them up, put them out of use. No production, no use, no display of any of those weapons. So they would be locked up in depots. And then you would have a peace process. As the Good Friday Agreement happened, in the Good Friday Agreement, it happened in 1998. The disarmament was never finished until 2007, 2008. It took a whole decade after, and it came as the outcome of a peace agreement, not a precondition. In that way, you have the save-face leeway for a group like Hamas to convince its own members on the ground and convince other more hardline groups in Gaza, Kataib Mujahideen, Al-Hayya Nasser, etc. The deal that is being put on the table, even if Hamas's leadership agrees to it, you would expect a huge amount of its rank and file members to refuse, as well as the other factions. They would not give up their weapons before they see the Israelis out of Gaza. The problem at the moment is basically whether Hamas agrees to disarmament or decommissioning, both of them are dead end. Both of them are basically rhetorical, political traps. It's a Netanyahu maneuver. I've spoken to numerous mediators, European officials, even some Israeli experts that are connected to the war ministry, to the security establishment, or whatever you would call it. And what they are saying is if Hamas says we are willing to disarm, Israel will say we don't believe them. We need to finish the job ourselves. If Hamas says we will disarm and get an international mission to go and verify, Israel would say we don't trust an international mission. They're anti-Semites. We need to stay in Gaza. Israel would use this as an indefinite excuse. Whenever you would have a verification mission that would say Gaza has been 100% disarmed, Israel would say, no, we have some secret intelligence pointing towards some covert cell somewhere in a tunnel underground, and we need to stay there for the next year or two or 100 years until we find that cell. Who's going to verify after the Israelis? The other thing is that if you try to tell Israel that Hamas in Gaza is now in a corner and that they are genuinely desperate for a deal, the Israelis' answer is, good, that means we have to double the pressure, we have to double the violence to finish them off. If you say, no, Hamas has actually improved its situation, Hamas has rebuilt itself, Hamas is now fully in charge, Israel would say, yeah, good, that gives us all the more reason to use the maximum violence possible to crush them. So there is no way out of this. It's a rhetorical trap. The Israelis have made up their mind that they would never accept anything less than the full ethnic cleansing of Gaza. That's why mediators are telling us that even if Hamas accepts every dictation that has been put on the table, there is not going to be any reconstruction in Gaza as a minimum until the Israeli elections are over. Because you're now in a situation where the Israeli political mainstream sees any gesture of humanity towards Gaza as political suicide. The only way you survive politically is that you need to keep drumming up the rhetorics of genocide, total destruction, what Israel calls voluntary migration, voluntary as in starve to death, get bombed to death, or leave out to nowhere. And it remains basically the consensus in the Israeli political mainstream. You have a clear majority of Israelis that have showed favorability of the option of ethnically cleansing Gaza or supporting the voluntary migration. I believe it was about 82%. And Israel would not relent. They spent close to $100 billion on that genocide. They sacrificed close to 900 soldiers. They ruined and destroyed Israel's international standing to finish the job that Ben Gurion started in 1948. They're not just going to pivot and change their mind because Trump asked them nicely. So that's the dilemma we're in.
Mohammed Shahada, thank you for your time.